everyone. Welcome back to the CCO Follow podcast. This is it. This is our final wrap-up episode on talking about singleness.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, Travis, but for me, it was really eye-opening because I wasn't someone coming into this. I mentioned it on the very first podcast. I wasn't thinking about singleness. I didn't really care about singleness as much as we should.
Yeah.
And it just wasn't on my mind. And so going through realizing, whoa, this is like actually a pretty major step in our Christian faith. Like this is kind of a default, being single. And it isn't a stopgap. It isn't oh, you're not completed yet.
Yeah.
This is just a status of life. And it was really just eye-opening to hear from, different people like Hunter and Amy and Pat. And for me, it definitely shifts how I view the people around me and my church community and just my community at large. But I would say I'm kind of in the boat of I wasn't really doing that well. I wasn't involving single people in my life. But I'm curious for you, Travis, because I know you and I differed on that. You really did come at singleness like, yeah, we gotta cover this. This is big. So what was it like for you?
I mean, we're not perfect in it. It has been on our minds for a long time, thankfully, because of actually people like Amy who, brought it up to Alicia and, kind of made us realize that. And so it has been on our minds for a while, but I think getting to talk to so many different single people this month, getting to have the people on the podcast, it definitely deepened my appreciation of certain struggles, deepened my appreciation of certain blessings, and deepened my appreciation of just people who, you can't just look at a person and know what they're struggling with. You know what I mean? You can't just look at a person and just assume a lot of things. And so it was just, it was very eye-opening in that way and very just increasing appreciation for all those different things.
Yeah. We talk about on these little wrap-ups, like what's our favorite moments or episodes or whatever it is. And honestly, I keep thinking about Pat and just her story, how incredibly moving that was to hear what she's been through. And and honestly, it's not necessarily a rare thing by any stretch of the imagination. Like this happens, and many of us it'll happen to us too. You don't think it's going to happen to you, but
no, it'll probably happen to Alicia though. When we're old and I die first, she'll be single for a little bit.
And I think for me, it's like I don't know what I don't know if Molly will. We just don't know that. I think I would hope that it would be me first. I think she would do quite well.
Quite well for herself.
I definitely
get that life insurance money.
I don't think I would do very well at all. But thinking about Pat and just. It opened my eyes to things I hadn't seen before. Like, she had mentioned, Hunter had mentioned too, like being lonely and stuff. And she was like, yeah, there's being lonely, but there's also this physical lack, like this connection physically. And I'm like, whoa, I didn't even think of that. And that would be so hard. Yeah. But hearing Pat say, this is why, I'm hugging my girlfriends and like, because she doesn't get that same physical connection. Yeah. But it's like, it just shows like there's an importance to community even more than what we think of just like hanging out with one another. It's like we really are this family. And so it was just really eye-opening for me. But I'm curious for you, Travis, what was your favorite moment or episode? Or
I mean, since you brought up Pat, I'll bring up the other two, both Hunter and Amy. Hunter, it was really cool to see someone who and I don't want to say thriving in the sense of like he doesn't want. I mean, he made clear he's like, yeah, I do hope to be married. I do hope to be with someone. But thriving in the sense of like that's not consuming him. Thriving in the sense that like he's embracing, like Paul says, the gift that God has given him, which is right now singleness. Yeah, and just how he's trying to put up safeguards to not just serve a ton, but also to be in community, to to shore up some of the natural weaknesses in singleness, and to leverage the natural strengths of singleness. Just hearing from him,
AKA living healthily. Yeah, that's really what it is.
And obviously Pat is as well. That wasn't the focus of her episode, but with hunters, and just knowing there are many single people in our life and in our church who are doing that well. Now it's difficult, and I mean we talked plenty about that. There's a lot of difficulties, but just seeing that, and then Amy's, I think her story speaks very poignantly to where the church needs to help the most.
Yep.
In that, when she was single, simply just having to force community sometimes and try really hard. It's like, no person who desires community should have to try that hard in a Christian community. Like obviously there's some initiation, some on your part, but when you're trying, just hitting a brick wall, and then you get married and suddenly you're not even trying, it's just being flooded. That's discouraging. Yeah. That's sad to hear. And I think that's probably the experience of many people in our church, many people in our lives. And I think it was really important to get that part of her story and other things that she said, just, making sure that people are aware, like, hey, this is a reality. Yeah. And making people think and question, like, do I have any single people in my home group? Do I have any single people when I, go out and do this or that? Or is it just people of my same stage in life and everything else?
Or who's in my path that is single that I'm just overlooking? Yeah. I think that's a good one for me to realize, like, I have a lot of people in my life who are single that I've just never even considered. Yeah. It sounds so bad. But I'm just thankful for God's grace and mercy in my life. Yeah. But, this kind of brings up this question. Some of the questions, we kind of prepared, we wanted to address was, looking at who do we notice in our lives that are being single in like a healthy way, like doing well, and who are maybe struggling a little bit. And what do we have to say to them? Yeah. So I'm curious for you, Travis, what does looking healthy and single look like to you?
I'd say, first of all, it's attitude. Just like anything, out of the heart, the mouth speaks, and out of the heart bears much fruit. To be healthy in any stage of life starts with having a healthy relationship with God. So that includes being content in your situation. That includes having God be your priority. That includes just a lot of things that are kind of like internal and you can't really see and really aren't different between different stages of life. It's just relationship with God in that stage of life or in that situation. And so, because the reality is you could do all the same things, but with totally different attitudes, totally different hearts towards God.
Yep, and then it becomes very different.
Yeah. And because you see it sometimes, like, just to give two examples of like serving in community, you'll see a single person who's serving because they're like, I want to glorify God and I have extra time, and I want to live in community because God says it's healthy, and so this is an important thing for me to do, to be in their life, vice versa. But then we all know people who they serve in order to maybe find someone, or they join community to maybe find someone, And I know that was, that's always a conversation with certain people, and it's
it happens.
And so I think it's less about even necessarily the actions they're doing. Obviously, there's you should be serving, you should be living community, all the things that honestly we tell.
It's doing the right things maybe for the wrong reason.
Exactly, and then it's like, well, healthy means doing those same things, but with the right
reason,
the right heart, the right attitude.
Exactly. I think especially. One of the reasons why, we got Hunter on was because we were noticing those things in his life. And, another thing that I noticed too is and this is probably going to come up a lot, especially when we answer our questions at the end. But for me, it's so simple, and it's not just being single. It's literally just when you look at healthy people in general, like if you're following after Christ, that's really for me, it's kind of the fruit that I see the most in people who are living healthy lives. And being single is like, are you pursuing Christ? Yeah. And
becoming more like him.
Exactly. Because if, it's the same thing if you're not single, in you could put that in any stage of your life. Are you pursuing after Christ? Yeah. And is that your desire? Like for serving, am I serving because I'm trying to pursue Christ and be more like him? Yeah. Or am I serving for XYZ, And I just think if we're to be living healthy lives and living in a healthy community, we all have to be pursuing after Christ. And that just means when you're single, you're also really your number one goal is to pursue Christ. Yeah. But that leads us to like this other part where, and this is so common, and it's not. I wouldn't say it's common even more than being single. But when we look at maybe someone who's single, who's really struggling, what are the things that we see? I think I'm seeing a lack of, maybe it's a lack of awareness, but it's a lack of that right heart direction where you're pursuing Christ. And it leads to this struggle of kind of my desire over Christ's desire. I'm curious for you, what do you see?
Yeah, like lack of contentment.
Yeah.
And, that's really easy to say. It would be like if we were, talking about someone who is, way less financially off than we are, and we're like, well, it's just lack of contentment. Like it can come across as very not helpful and just very like, well, you just don't understand. But I mean, the reality is that when we do have discontent hearts, it shows itself in how we live, and it shows itself in how we, follow or don't follow Jesus. And so, to say that a person not living well, a single person, generally is discontent first and foremost, is not meant to be like, oh, and it's so easy, but it's like, yeah, and like we need Jesus. Like,
absolutely. That's good. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah. Like, we're definitely not trying to dismiss like, oh, it's this simple thing, just fix it. It's like, no, like we're talking about issues of the heart. We're talking about anytime you're talking about not following Jesus well, it's almost always there's some issue of the heart. That's not some simple change. And it's not some thing to be taken lightly. It's not something to be just like,
it's a partnership with the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's, but you have to recognize that it's there to be able to even ask God to help you in that, to take away the things that aren't of him and replace it with things that are of him. So I don't mean that in a flippant way or in a, in a way that, downputs or, makes light of the difficulty of singleness. Yeah. But it's like, I mean, the people who I know who are living single the least well, I'd say that they are so focused on, like Paul said, use the gift that you have. They're so focused on the gift they don't have, which makes it impossible to be content. Yeah. I mean, it's impossible to be content with what you have when you're looking at something else. And especially when you're desiring and over-desiring that thing. Yep. And so, I think it's just hard. And again, not saying that's easy to do. It's hard.
Yeah. And it just goes to show, why it's important to be intentional if you're in that position, but it's also important to be intentional in community. So what's the community's response to these kinds of two different kinds of people? Like, what should we be focused on, and how can we help?
I mean, focused to include them in community, since that is, I don't want to say it's so unnatural, but it's like it's definitely not what you gravitate towards. Especially when you get married, you generally look at you definitely look at other couples, because generally you're trying to find easy ways for both of you to have someone there that you can relate to and have fun with. Yeah. And you feel like if you invite two single people, like this is, psychological going on, at least in my married head, if you invite two single people, then it feels like I don't want them to think that I'm like setting them up. It's like, no, we just individually like both of you. And so like there's that weirdness too. And so even if you think about inviting single people, sometimes you're like, oh, but I don't want them to think I'm setting up with so-and-so just because we invited them too. Yeah. And so, there's been times where we've invited friends and we just tell them like, just to make sure we're inviting so-and-so. We're not setting just because sometimes it's less obvious than others. You know what I mean? Yeah. And we never want to be matchmaker. That's a terrible role. But I
have a question I want to ask. Maybe I shouldn't ask it.
That's terrifying.
No, but I that's important, and I never even thought about that.
But again, focusing on bringing them into community, I think is one of the biggest parts, because the reality is all the other things, like trying to encourage them in the difficulty, like Pat's saying, even the physical touch, stuff like that, none of that happens outside of community. Like, community is literally the first step. If you do not have community, you can't have encouragement in the things that are discouraging to you. You can't have uplifting. Yeah. So it's just like all the parts that need to happen in someone's life require community to happen. Yeah. And so that's the first step.
It's me. I'm thinking of a question that I want answered.
That's terrifying.
I don't know if we can answer this right now, but it really is like, I'm starting to see, I think it's a natural place. Like because like we're having this conversation on singleness.
Mm-hmm.
Next month, we're going to have a conversation on dating and engagement.
Yeah.
So we're kind of covering steps
there we'll
of
play
life.
Matchmaker. No.
But that's the question is, I think it's, I hope we're not coming off like, oh, you shouldn't be single, or, oh, you should be single. I hope we're coming off like it's natural, because like when you get involved in community, when you come over to people's houses or whatever, like it's natural. Sometimes you know.
Yeah, sometimes you do meet someone.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
But it's.
I met Alicia from serving at church.
So that's a perfect example, because it's not. It's just it's the intentional desire that is the difference maker. That's what we're talking about. It's like,
are you joining community for the sake of potentially dating, or are you joining community because you need community?
Yes, and that honestly, it's hard. It's a hard thing, but
I mean, even the Bible says, who can know the hearts is deceitfully wicked.
Yeah.
And so above all else, whenever it comes to heart issues, you also have to simply ask God and say, like the psalmist, like, search me, O God, know my heart. Like, is there any wicked way in me? Like, I don't know. Like Paul said, I don't even judge myself.
It's one of those things. This is so off topic, but I was just at a tennis tournament over this past week, and
you won.
We had a couple teams win, a couple teams lose.
Hey, nice.
But I had this parent come up to me and was like, "Hey, can my son, can he wear like a smartwatch when he plays? Like, is there a rule against that?" I'm like, I don't think so. He can wear a watch, and there wasn't. I checked, league rules. You can wear a watch, and I was like, why did he ask me that? And he said, it was like, oh, because I just asked because it'd be really easy for parents to like coach their kids in the middle of a point or a match. They can just text and give pointers. And I thought to myself, I looked at him, I was like, I had never even considered that.
Yeah.
I had never even thought that. But it just shows, it's like, it wasn't me answering that question saying, yeah, I think it's fine. I could have answered that knowingly, like,
or your
he's
opinion.
cheating. Yeah, you should definitely do that.
Yeah.
Or I just answered it the way that I knew.
Yeah.
But sometimes things happen, and it just, like you're saying, like, it's just the intentionality of the heart at the time, and only us and God knows that, and sometimes
not even us.
Sometimes only God knows that. But yeah, I hope that we're coming off in this podcast this month talking about singleness in just a hope to just live healthy, like whatever season of life you're in, whatever status of life you're in, for whatever reason, the best thing we can do is pursue Christ and get involved in community. So that leads us to the part I've been looking forward to
all month long,
for multiple months of waiting for
Arthur's
this.
favorite day of the month.
We're going to cover questions.
Woo!
Questions that you sent in. Maybe there's even a comment that we'll read that someone sent in. And I'm excited about this because it's a way for us to be more...
Make sure we're covering the things that people are thinking about.
And it's real. It's real. We're not just like Travis and I don't sit here and go through, we have our notes written out, but it's not like we're hitting an agenda.
Maybe you're not.
I guess there's an agenda to it, but it's not like we have this curriculum that we're going through.
Yeah. It'd be a lot better if we did.
Maybe, but I'm hopeful because it's a way for us to be all together as the viewer, the listeners, Travis and I, the church, the community, to just get involved and ask questions. I know this is way more than what you think the questions are, but
that's this is important.
It is. So, Travis, what are some questions that we have to answer today? Maybe you can ask them. Maybe I can. Maybe I'll ask them. What do you want to start with? Easy or hard? Because I feel like the first question is pretty hard, but I think it's good.
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So one of the questions we had, what part do you think singleness plays in the sanctification of both the single and the married within the body at large? So talking about the church body, how does singleness play a part in the sanctification of both of us? So like, how does being single help sanctify you as an individual if you're single, and how does singleness in general help sanctify if you're married?
Well, I think first and foremost, like God uses all things together for good. And so I'd say every part of our life, God is able to use for sanctification, because he's God and he's just good that way. So there's that. But I mean, just like any other stage of life, singleness allows for certain sanctification that other parts of life don't. To use a different example, just to show how broad this is, I mean, employment and unemployment allow for different types of sanctification. The employment allows for a sanctification of simply being disciplined, of working hard, of, all those kind of like aspects of work. And God having to chip away maybe at pride at your job status or your money you make or whatever. Being unemployed, God can easily chip away at pride of, self, especially in our self-individualistic culture, it can chip away at things like that. It can be used to in your trust in him. So like every area, every situation we find ourselves in has potential for sanctification. Singleness, I think there's a lot of sanctification that happens uniquely in singleness in the aspect of having to maybe pursue community more, because I'd say that's a very godly attribute to actually seek to be others centered, where
not just becoming a hermit.
Because I mean, in our own culture, it's basically singleness is like glorified to be like a time of selfishness and a time of meanness. And it's like, God's like, do you want to be like this? Like, this is a time to emphasize and for God's Spirit to work inside you to not be that way. And then obviously the areas that maybe you suffer. I mean, we know that all suffering produces perseverance, hope, and all those kind of things. Even in the unique sufferings of single people, you have sanctification happening.
Yeah. And I think also, just to kind of piggyback on that, when we're talking about sanctification, you're so absolutely right. It is a constant happening there. In every circumstance, in every situation, every season of life, God is going to use it in hopes to sanctify you. And, I think about I'm a married person. I'm not single in this.
I'm a married person.
That's my status. And it's totally sanctifying in how, like, first off, it was convicting. Like, I am convicted now hearing, man, I haven't really paid attention to people as I should. Like, that's part of being loving is to think of others and not self. And so there's a level of like, coming outside of myself, because in marriage, I think it's a temptation, maybe not a temptation, but it's easy to feel like I'm one with my wife, but I can say, well, I'm thinking of others because I'm thinking of my wife. But the reality is, like, that's us. I'm thinking of me. And it's easy to get caught up in doing things like that instead of being Christ-like and saying, hey, let's look around me. Let's invite people into my life and share and have good experiences and love on these people, whether they're married, single, or whatnot. So I think there's a level of sanctification there.
It honestly reminds me of how Jesus says, when you invite people to a party or dinner, like, don't just invite those who can bless you, but invite the outcasts and the downtrodden, all these different things. Not saying singles are that, but like you said about you and your wife, where it's like, it's easy to be like, well, I'm loving someone else. And it's like, you're loving yourself.
Yeah.
And even when we expand that a little bit further, well, I love my close friends. And it's like, you're kind of loving yourself still. You have to like reach out even further to be like, actually sacrificially loving someone, to be like, I'm not actually, there's no benefit here for me. And not saying that's every single person, but I'm saying we definitely think too selfishly sometimes, even when we're thinking others.
Oh, totally. That's a great question. Thank you for asking that question. That was a great question. What other questions, comments? What are we looking at? A lot of your questions, I will say, a lot of the times we can kind of put together multiple questions in one question, because there's a lot of similar things. Like, people had mentioned to you many of the same things. So that's, we
didn't talk about these yet, right? Did we talk about those?
I think we did.
Okay. So then one of the comment that we got this month was from someone just talking about, as a single woman, that she finds great comfort in the fact the Bible tells us we will be single when we're in heaven. That again, that is our default state.
Yeah.
And that that when we are essentially one with Christ, the bride of Christ, that we no longer even have the need for marriage, that we go back to our default state because we're in this like perfect community, both with the
Don't
church,
tell my
the family
wife
of God.
that. She doesn't like that truth.
Yeah.
But it is a truth.
But like this, this greater kingdom of God and, capital C church and with God himself. And so, that is a great encouragement because, one, I think looking to heaven is always a great encouragement. Like there's never been something that when you put it in light of eternity, that's not like, okay, as First Peter puts it, we endure these temporary sufferings, although necessary, that we may see, the glory of him to come. Like it's not, nothing looks so, dark as when you put it in light of eternity. It's just kind of like, okay, this is happening. This is temporary. Yeah.
That's so good. Again, that's another thing I hadn't thought about. A lot of that this month. Yeah. And I will say, 3 of the questions that we had, we did answer. I wasn't thinking that great. They were questions. But this one here,
last one. Kind of two-parter. How do I find contentment and joy in singleness without feeling left behind? And is it okay to feel frustrated or discouraged about being single? That's good. I read it. That means you get to go first.
I'll answer the last part first. Is it okay to feel frustrated? Or discouraged? For a minute.
For a minute, you get 60 seconds of frustration.
And I might be counting. Yeah, I might be a little aggressive on that answer, but
clearly.
But I think in everything, right? When we look at other things in life, should we be frustrated about certain things? I think being frustrated, and I think frustration leads to discouragement. I think it's easy to be discouraged, and it's oftentimes we are frustrated about things that make total sense to be frustrated about. But are we to stay there? I have to say no, because if we look at life and we just think about ourselves and things we can or can't control, be frustrated, because there's a lot of things that suck. But the reality is we have a creator who loves us, who is guiding and leading us. And ultimately, I just think of Job. Like Job should have been frustrated. Yeah. To a certain extent. Discouraged. Yeah, he was discouraged. But we're not to stay there. And it's because we have this faith in God the Father. And we know, and we're to believe that like he loves us, and everything that happens is for our good and to glorify him. And so I think when we're looking at the different, like the struggles of singleness, and should I feel like, is it okay to feel frustrated and discouraged? It's totally natural. Like it's absolutely going to happen. Yeah. But don't stay there. What was the first part of that question?
Well, can I actually...
go ahead.
So I'll give them 120 seconds instead of 60.
Oh, perfect.
I think the key phrase in this is it okay to feel this way? And I think that could be a very loaded phrase, because it could mean very different things. Yeah. The reality is like we see Paul talking about how he and his companions despaired even life itself. And that's not a 60-second experience. Yeah. You know what I mean? I guess it could be, but if you're writing about it, this probably was not a moment in time where you're just like, well, glad that passed 60 seconds later. Yeah. And so I give a little more room for it to be like, this could be something you experience. I often say when it comes to counseling, especially when it comes to counseling like kids or parents about kids, it's like, emotions are not you. They're things you feel and experience, but they're not you. Yeah. And so I think it's perfectly okay to experience lots of feelings and to be like, this doesn't own me. Yeah. And that's where I think there's some difference, is that to say, oh, is it okay to feel discouraged? What am I going to say? Like, no, feel differently. But is it okay to let those feelings rule your life?
Is
it okay to let those emotions dictate what you now believe is right or wrong to do, what you believe, is it taking all your attention? Is it,
where's your focus on when you have those emotions?
Yeah. Where are you letting those emotions take you?
Yeah.
And so it's less about like, is it okay to feel this way? And it's like, well, you're going to feel how you feel. I'm not going to, reprimand you for feeling a certain way.
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, so you felt that way. Great. You feel that way constantly. Okay. What are you doing? Like, where's your focus? Where's your intent? Where's your hope? Where's your, are you, seeking to alleviate those feelings by doing correct things? Sometimes doing the correct things actually makes those feelings worse. You know what I mean? And that, again, we don't live and die by our feelings.
Yeah.
Facts don't care about your feelings, Arthur.
And it's also taking on truth and taking on peace. Like, there's peace in the Lord, and there's joy in the Lord. And we're talking about that in church right now, but it's, one of the questions I asked my home group was like, when you're struggling and when you're going through a season of suffering, how do you experience joy?
Yeah.
And it looks different. Like it's still painful.
Yeah.
Like the things that are happening to you are painful, and the emotions are frustration, but it's, what does joy look like in that season?
Yeah.
What does peace look like in that season? And that's why I think you're dead on, and I appreciate you saying that. It's okay.
It's okay to feel
those things.
Yeah, it's okay to feel anyway. Now the question is, what are you doing with it?
It's what are you doing with it? And that's why I say don't stay there.
Yeah.
Don't wallow in it.
Just like how it says, in your anger, do not sin. Like, it's not saying like anger is just, and now there's plenty of things to say you shouldn't be hot-tempered, all those kind of things. Just like you shouldn't be so quick to get discouraged. But it's like, okay, you are discouraged. Like, we're not going to, shame on you.
Yeah. So what was the first part of that question?
So the first part of that was, how do I find contentment and joy in singleness without feeling left behind?
I think you answered it.
Okay.
I think you did, because you just said, it's like, what are you, like, where are you going? Mm-hmm. Like, oftentimes let's say a problem comes up. Mm-hmm. I have my neighbor cut my coax cable, my internet in the backyard doing, or whatever it is. That I'm going to identify the problem. Can I fix it? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to go fix the problem. I think there's a level of like, that's going very logically through things. Mm-hmm. But sometimes, it's raining and like, these aren't really good examples at all. They're horrible examples, but I want
to be married. I want to go fix a coax cable.
Yeah. But some things, like, we just can't change. It's not for us. It's we like, so what are we doing about it? Where are we going with it? Like, are we pursuing the Lord? Obviously, when it's something so simple as a coax cable, like,
Did you pray about it first?
You should. I didn't, but maybe I should have. I don't know.
This is God's way of taking away internet for a time.
Yeah.
You could have lived in,
there's sanctifying process in that for sure. But there's this level of like, how can we be content in singleness? It's like, again, we've said this in the podcast, and it's hard and it's not easy, but we have to partner with the Holy Spirit that's working in us to pursue the Lord.
Yeah.
And that and community. That's the other thing too, is community. Like, when we can choose to do the wrong things, like staying discontent and just searching out, trying to find a spouse or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Or we can be content by pursuing God, pursuing what He has.
Whenever I hear the phrase of like finding contentment and stuff like that, I always think back to this book by Jeremiah Burroughs. I cannot recommend it enough. It's called A Rare Jewel of Christian Contentment. And I think I quoted him in a previous episode in this situation, but I don't remember if I mentioned this specifically. One of the things he said about contentment that has just really stuck with me is that when we're seeking to find contentment, we don't find it by raising our circumstances to match our desire, but instead we lower our desire to match our circumstances. And contentment is not found in simply changing the like where we are this very moment. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't necessarily change something. Like if you are, in poverty or something like that, it doesn't mean you shouldn't go and, find a job or shouldn't find a better paying job or what have you. Do your best you can to be out of poverty. However, in finding contentment in the process, you do that by lowering your desires, not by raising your status.
Well, and I think, like, I have a little bit different view, but I think like when you look at the Lord and God and the truth of reality, like he's the creator, like we can be content with him. Like he satisfies even more than what we could ever imagine or dream of. He is so satisfying because we're created to be satisfied by him. And so there's a level of like, like when you're, if you're homeless, if you're struggling, like, it's probably, you probably don't want to stay there, and that's okay, but you can be content not in your sitting on the ground and like, oh, I'm content with my box. No, it's content with I'm citizen of a different nation. I'm part of a kingdom,
which essentially is lowering your desire for the one thing and raising your desire for another.
Exactly.
But I think it comes down to, something's got to give. Either you're changing your situation or you're changing your desire. And I think biblically, the first step is always change our desire. And
is it lined up with Christ?
Yeah. And I mean, we always talk about, the Lord's Prayer is like, your kingdom come, your will be done. And do we really want his will to be done? Because his will to be done for some of us might be being single. For some of us, it might be not getting that raise we wanted. For some of us, it might be, living without kids. Some of it might be like, there's a lot of things that we say, well, we say we want God's will to be done. We can trust that God's will is being done. So are we adjusting our desires to match what God's will currently is?
Whenever I pray that prayer, and I pray it often, I always, well, not always, but many times I have to say, Lord, and change my heart to find joy in that, to find your peace in that, to find you in that. Because, my heart wants different things, and it's part of that sanctifying process. So, man, great questions.
Yeah.
And there's a couple questions that we got that we'll answer next month because it's about dating and engagement. Woo! And that's your little promo, I guess you could say. Next week, we're going to be introducing the new topic, which is dating and engagement.
Yeah.
We're talking with some people. We've spoken with one in particular that we're excited to share. Let's not get too ahead of ourselves and saying like, oh, now we're talking about dating and engagement because if you're single, you should get married. Separate that.
Yeah.
But also it's another, I would say that's the only time like dating and engagement where there is this, it's not a status. It is a kind of a stopgap.
It's in between. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You shouldn't be in that forever.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's going to be good. So look forward to that. I know we are. Travis, thank you so much for just this whole podcast.
Yeah, we're enjoying
everything. I love doing this. And I'm hearing from a lot of you guys now that you are listening and you're enjoying it. You're getting things from it. Like me, your eyes are being opened. So that's awesome. I just praise God for that. So thank you so much for joining with us this month and on this episode. We look forward to what next month has to bring. And as always, God bless.